so why do I rag on Ruby all the time? Well, because Ruby deserves to be ragged on. Okay, I'm just joking around. The reason I rag on Ruby is because it's just a running joke on this channel going back a couple of years. Also because many years ago, when Ruby and Rails were at its height, I wrote an article defending the PHP community because they were feeling pretty assailed at that time, as they still are. They're feeling pretty bad about themselves. And I pointed out in 2006 and 2007 that PHP was not going to go anywhere. At the time, everybody thought PHP was done. Ruby was going to take over the world. And yeah, so the opposite happened, of course. Ruby had its high point around then, and it's been stagnant ever since. Now, let me make a couple points about Ruby. Number one, there are still jobs today with Ruby on Rails today. People still use Ruby for server automations and stuff. But the problem is that the mindset, if you will, or the nerd zeitgeist has sort of leaned away from Ruby, and it's moved into JavaScript and Python. Python, its position is supported by the fact that it's used quite a bit in data sciences and AI. And so that bleeds off into the web stack with Python, Flask, Django, etc. And then you have JavaScript. And of course you have PHP. Now PHP had gotten so big, and it is so big, it's used for WordPress, it's used for Joomla, excuse me. It's so big, it's got such a huge market share that it's never going to be supplanted. It's one of those technologies that it's reached that critical mass. It's reached that tipping point where it's always going to have a pretty big position in the marketplace. So many small businesses rely on PHP to some extent. A lot of it is WordPress, admittedly, but so who cares? A lot of companies use WordPress. Ruby never got that big. So, and what happened was Ruby's big advantage was not so much the language itself. The language has some clever things about it. I kind of like certain things about Ruby. I know it's news. Stef likes Ruby. I like certain things about it. And I've actually I had one app we built using Ruby because it worked really well for that particular type of job. That being said, today Ruby is nichifying, if you will. There's still jobs. So if you're interested in Ruby, first thing you got to do, please look around at the local job market. Make sure there are opportunities for you in the types of businesses that you want to work in. You may find in your neighborhood there's no Ruby jobs. There might be a lot of Java nodes, JavaScript node jobs, Java jobs, could be a PHP, who knows. Just look around. Everything is local. I don't think Ruby's going to go anywhere anytime soon. I think it's going to be around for many, many years, but it's nichified. And I just don't see how Ruby is going to make any big splash again. Why? Because, again, the core of the Ruby language itself is very good. It's got some good things about it, but it's also slow at runtime. And though there's always been kind of a battle between the Python people and the Ruby people, because Python has been adopted by the schools and by the AI and machine learning community, it's going to run circles around Ruby in terms of its use case. In fact, Python it could be the most popular language in the world in the next couple of years. Hard to say what will happen. Depends on what survey you see. But Python's definitely in the top 3, and it could be number 1, number 2 already. I'm not sure. I haven't looked at the latest data. Ruby, I don't think will ever rise up even in the top 10 again, simply because it doesn't have anything significant enough about it that makes it worthy of that attention. For people to drop JavaScript or Python or PHP for Ruby, they're going to have something fundamental to the language will have to be developed to make it attractive enough. And I just don't see it. I think all the modern programming languages are very, very neck and neck in terms of their capabilities. They each have their advantages and stuff. Even Ruby has certain things that I prefer, for example, over Python. I don't like the fact that we use indents and spacing to define code blocks in Python. I much rather use the and keyword as they do in Ruby. Or I much rather use curly braces personally. That's my favorite. But maybe that's because I have a Java bias. Hard to say. That all said about Ruby, let me point out a few key things about Ruby. Now this is going to sit down, everybody. Sit down, because this is going to blow you away. I think Ruby, and more specifically, precisely, Ruby on Rails has had a tremendous positive impact in terms of the development community till this day. Even though Ruby hit its high watermark, I could argue in 2007 or 8, I think that Ruby on Rails, its impact on development is still being felt today, and it deserves a little bit of credit for what they did, especially the Rails community specifically, where they, I won't get into all the details, but basically they came up with a way of thinking about coding that highly experienced nerds would have talked about, but they made it popular. Things like, instead of getting caught up in tons and tons of configurations that are extremely complex, trying to have contingencies in your code for every potential thing that could possibly happen, they came up with a simple concept, convention over configuration. Basically, everybody in your coding group, your developer group, agrees on a certain convention in the code, so you don't have to configure it with all kinds of XML files or TXT files. Just to give you a background, when the Ruby thing started to really grow, I think a big part of it was driven by disillusioned Java programmers. Java at that point was getting so bureaucratic, was getting so heavy that just to set up a basic hello world required you fill up 5 XML files and configure all kinds of server software. It was just a real pain. If you ever looked at XML files, that was their main. XML was originally designed. Well, I don't know what the original design for, but XML was largely used in the 80s, in the 90s, and the early 2000s to configure servers. So you'd fill up an XML file and you configure the behavior. Okay, the server will do this and that, and you would fill out, like you could have to fill out 3 or 4 XML files just to get something simple going. So the Rails community said, well, that's crazy. Less configuration, more convention, and a whole bunch of other things that they implemented just to make building your typical web app much, much easier for the average person. Now, of course, since that time, things have changed. There's been a move away from the Rails-style monolith web app structure, more a smaller footprint was supported by microservices, and there's even more different types of serverless tech that's out there now. Anyway, that's another video, but I just want to acknowledge a few things in this video, namely that I don't really hate on Ruby. I just don't think that it has anything compelling about Ruby or Ruby on Rails that you won't find in other stacks, other languages. I don't think Ruby is going to regain its crown, because if it ever had it, because of the reason I just mentioned. And I think that all of these technologies, all the scripting, lightweight scripting languages, whether it be JavaScript, PHP, Ruby, Python, maybe you can throw in Kotlin, etc. They're all very good. They all got their pros and cons. A lot of people choose one or the other depending on preferences, depending on the infrastructure in the company they happen to be working for, etc. As one of my uncles taught me a long time ago, he said, and he used to manage these huge $50 million projects for the Canadian research body. Anyway, he said, for a new technology to supplant an older technology, the new technology, he used to say, has to be 10 times better. Now, how you measure 10 times better, I don't know. Is it 10 times faster? Is it 10 times easier? Anyway, 10 times more secure. I don't know how you would measure that, but it gives you an idea of how much better a new technology has to be to replace an old one. And one of my fundamental arguments that I've been arguing for a few years now, more than that, is that the languages that are out there, the frameworks that are out there, are all pretty good. You can produce amazing apps with Python, with Ruby, with PHP, with Java, with C#. But if you do it with Ruby, it's not going to be as good as it would be otherwise. Like my mic?